Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Sorry that was a little bit crazy, but I was a fool for thinking that it wouldn't be. For those of you that have no idea what this is or who I am, same, but specifically, thanks, Eve. Specifically, I'm Ariana. I'm a junior, and in October of 2020, I founded One Story, and One Story is a conversational series that aims to bring unity through people sharing formative life experiences, and my hope is that this will be a catalyst for hope and positivity, which I think we could all use a little bit of right now. And who was a better catalyst of hope and positivity than Mollie Landman? So yeah. So Mollie, thank you for being our first guest. I've said it 100 times that's today and like the past 2 weeks, but we really lucked out with you being our first guest. And the first question I'm gonna ask everybody, because just selfishly I need a new playlist. What is one song that you think we have to know about?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm just so happy to be here and so honored to be here. So it's such a joy to share with you all. But one song that I love, that I have loved for so long, that many of you may or may not be familiar with, is Oceans by Hillsong. It's been one of my favorite worship songs for a long time, a song that I have prayed through often, and it's just been super formative in my faith and in my life in general. So that's my go-to.
What's called
Hillsong. So Oceans by Hillsong.
Okay. I'm gonna start a playlist so we can
I love any water reference, honestly.
Okay. So Sarah's a swimmer. There you go. Yeah. Okay. So just tell us a little about your background, family, interests, major, where you're from, Social Security. I don't know.
The goods. Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian household. My dad is a Methodist pastor, so I knew about Jesus since the womb, pretty much. And I'm from south of Pittsburgh, like an hour and a half south of here, an hour and a half south of here. But since my dad is a pastor, I moved around a lot as a kid, so I went to 3 different school districts in my time as a child, which was great. I have 2 little sisters who annoy me a ton, but I love them very much. And I'm growing closer and closer with them as I get older. My major is biblical religious studies, though I came to Grove City as a mechanical engineering major, which is a big switch. And that whole transition of majors is a story of itself. But right now I'm just trusting the Lord with my life, and I've recently felt a call to ministry. So I'm just walking in faith, trusting that the Lord is going to guide me to where he wants me to be. But I do believe that he wants me to be here at Grove City College. My heart is just huge for this school. Love it so much. And some of my interests, I love to sing, particularly in choral settings. So I am a part of the touring choir here at Grove City College. One of my favorite things, some of my favorite people there. And I also love to write, though I sometimes just don't get enough time, but I love to write poems and blogs and hopefully books one day. But love to sing, love to write, love my family. I think that sums up some of the basic background information. Plus, I love milk. That's just the thing.
Chocolate or plain or what?
Oh, white milk.
White milk, okay.
Whole white milk. Yeah, it's just so good. Very strange, but yeah, I think that sums me up.
Okay. So, tell us about Brady, and well, first of all, who is Brady, and how you met him, what made you fall in love with him, the process of falling in love with him, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So Brady is my late husband. For those of you who didn't know that, that's probably a big shock, but I imagine most of you are somewhat aware of that. So Brady and I met when I was in 7th grade, so I was 12 years old, so a babe. And I met Brady when I moved school districts, when my dad got a new church and we moved to a new school, and I was the new girl again, and I was meeting tons of new people, and one of the people that I met was Brady. So my first memory of him was in reading class 7th grade reading class, and he was sitting next to me, and I remember looking at him and seeing these dark purple circles under his eyes and thinking, gosh, this kid would look so much better if he just had a little bit of concealer on. That's just makes me laugh thinking about that time. And then he asked me to dance at the 7th grade junior high Christmas dance. And I said yes, and at this point he was a foot shorter than me, but I said yes anyway. And we became really great friends afterwards. And I think what originally drew me to Brady, what I found special about him is how he just pulled people in and desired to make everyone and anyone laugh all the time. I consider myself to be a fairly reserved person, and it's like Brady saw me on the sidelines and pulled me in and just wanted me to enjoy life and encouraged me to enjoy life, because that's not something that it was natural to me. But he wanted to make me laugh, and I just found that to be super special. And as I got to know him more, as we became better friends and as our families did more things together, I saw that underneath his humor, there was this kindness and selflessness that just overflowed, that he saw people and loved people, not in a fake way that I think most people do. Like, everyone will be nice and say hi and ask how you're doing, but when Brady talked to people, he genuinely cared. And I noticed that, and I, started crushing on him because of those feelings and because of those things about him. And then after we were together for a while, at this point, everyone knows that we like each other, and we know that we like each other because it's a small school that we're from, and you know how that is. Everyone knows everyone's business. But anyway, in the middle of high school, Brady is diagnosed with bone cancer. And, this started because he had some pain in his leg, and it took them a long time to figure out what that was from. But eventually they found that it was because of a brick-sized tumor in between the 2 bones in his right leg that was causing the pain. And so then at the age of 15, Brady was diagnosed with bone cancer. And obviously that flipped both of our worlds upside down at this point, since Brady and I were really close at this time. But I think what really surprised me about Brady's response is that he told me after he found out he was diagnosed was that, Mollie, I just can't wait to see what God does with this. I am really going to try to show people Jesus through this battle. And I saw that, and I think the feelings that I had before of really liking him and crushing on him, they grew and turned to love soon after that. Seeing a guy who took the things that life threw at them and said, okay, God, what are you going to do with it? And that was really beautiful. And I don't like to use the word I fell for him, but I chose to love him because of those things.
So I think for a lot of people, especially being so young, deciding to marry someone that has a history and a very serious illness that could potentially and unfortunately did have lasting implications would be scary, because obviously if you're choosing to marry him, you wanted a life with him. So I just wonder what role, if any, and you touched on this a little bit, but what role, if any, did Brady's diagnosis play? Because I think there's a common misconception that you married Brady because he was diagnosed, and as I understand it, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, so Brady and I got married when we were both 18, which is quite young. It feels younger now that I'm 20, which is not much older, but I feel like I'm very old. But it didn't feel like we were getting married young at the time. So after Brady was diagnosed, I, stuck by him, and after 9 months of treatment the first time, he was all good to go. The cancer was not showing up on the scan, so the doctors were like, yay, you're good, go and live your life. And then after a while of Brady being cancer-free, the cancer did come back when we were juniors in high school. And after this point, the second time of us feeling like our worlds were flipped upside down, Brady and I started to have these conversations about, what do we want out of life? And how can we take advantage of things and not take life for granted? We had a lot of those conversations. And I asked Brady, very pointedly, a few months after he relapsed, I said, if you died today, what would you regret? And he told me, I would regret not marrying you. And so then after that, Brady and I spent months praying about that and trying to figure out how to respond, like, are we too young to be married? And like what our motives behind it were. And I think what we both realized after lots of prayer, about 9 months of prayer and seeking wise counsel from others, is that we just wanted to serve one another. We wanted to be there for each other. We loved one another. We knew what it was like to live and to love in the worst of circumstances. And we wanted to take advantage of that. And we felt like God was giving us the green light after we had prayed and sought out wisdom for so long. So when Brady and I were having these decisions, it wasn't like his cancer was really bad and the doctors were saying, okay, Brady, you got like 6 months to live, what are you gonna do? It wasn't like that at all. Brady was stable when we decided to get married. And so I think Brady being diagnosed, Brady relapsing, Brady's health in general, woke me up and woke him up, and we realized what we really wanted out of life. But it wasn't like we were scared of him dying and then decided to get married because we didn't know what was going to happen. So it was like an insurance type of thing, like, okay, we'll just get married, just in case. It was more of a, I love you so much, and I want to be with you regardless of what happens. So I don't think Brady and I would have gotten married if he hadn't been diagnosed, but I also don't think that I would have grown in my faith if that hadn't happened, or I wouldn't be the person I am today. So I probably wouldn't even be at Grove City College. Like, there's a lot of things that wouldn't have happened, but I think his diagnosis, his illness changed our lives, and then that made us want to be with one another, if that makes sense.
What was it like to walk with your husband through his treatment the second time or the first time?
Yeah. So the first time Brady and I were kind of boyfriend and girlfriend, like the weird junior high, well, I guess high school, you don't know what labels are, fun thing. But the first time that I was with Brady after he was diagnosed, I visited him in the hospital at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. And he was admitted for pain at this point. He wasn't even getting chemo yet. The pain was just so severe. And they were giving him morphine and he was maxed out and the medicine wasn't touching the pain at all. And so when I came to Children's, my mom just dropped me off outside. I walked up to the 9th floor where he was staying, and I could hear his screams before I even entered the room. You could hear him screaming the whole floor. And so I came in, and he immediately asked me to leave and just to sit in the hallway for a while until he, got his composure together. And so I sat in the hall for who knows how long, just hearing him scream. And the floor was silent besides that because everyone could hear. After a while, I decided to go in because I didn't know what else to do, and I sat next to him as he was laying in bed, and I grabbed his hand and I said, look, I didn't come here for myself to just sit in the hall. I came here to be with you, no matter what that looks like. And in between the screams, and between us weeping together at that point, he told me that he loved me for the first time. So that's kind of how it started with walking through treatment with Brady, was sitting there when things were uncomfortable and when things were hard. And through the first round of treatment, things got better, and once he started chemo, the tumor was starting to shrink, which helped with the pain. But there were a lot of hard times. I didn't have to necessarily hold his hair for him when he was throwing up because he didn't have any, but I still sat with him, and it was painful. It was painful for him too, I think, because I think part of him, wanted to be a guy and wanted to hide the discomfort from me, but we both grew in that, and him being vulnerable and me being supportive. In the second round of treatment, it was also very hard, but I think there was a lot more about his treatment, about his health that was unknown at the time. So I think support was not as much physical, but emotional, and talking with him and talking through his fears and everything. And then as he got sicker and sicker, and in the last months of his life, it was that I was with him 24/7, and he died a very slow and a very painful death, and the disease just took over his body and he just deteriorated. And so it was very hard. I was basically his nurse 24/7 at the end. He couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything on his own. So I was basically doing all of that. And I think that really taught me what it means to love a person selflessly. Because at that point, Brady couldn't give anything back. He could not physically do anything. He was trapped in his own body. But it was such a gift to love him so in those moments, to be able to be there for him because he couldn't even be there for himself. The disease took over his body to such a terrible extent.
So, gosh, would you say that you felt maybe not pressure, but a need or a desire to be strong for him, and or maybe he felt was trying to be strong for you? And how did each of you? I mean, I guess you can only speak for yourself, but how did you find the strength to do that for your husband?
Yeah, it was definitely a desire. I never felt pressured. And I think that's something Brady always was cautious of. He's like, Mollie, I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything for me. But I was always like, no, I want to be there for you. I love you. And I think that's what true love is you want to selflessly serve the other person, even when it's not pretty or fun. So it was very natural for me to love and support Brady when it was hard. It wasn't easy, but it felt natural because it came from a place of love, it wasn't forced or wasn't pressured. And I know it probably sounds like, oh my gosh, you were there so much for your husband, but I would say like Brady was there for me so much more. There was a lot of times that I was dealing with my own thing, and not knowing how to respond to my boyfriend, fiance, and husband having cancer. I mean, I don't know what that, no one around me was dealing with that. And Brady was so supportive with me through that. And I cried more often than he did. And I felt guilty a lot of the time because I'm like, I'm not even the one sick, but I feel all of these things. And he just would sit with me and allow me to cry on his shoulder and say, like, no, I want to be there for you too. And one of the most touching moments in the last weeks of his life was one night he was having a lot of pain, and so we got up in the middle of the night to get some medicine. And at this point I couldn't sleep. I was just up all night listening to him breathing because I was scared that he was going to die in the middle of the night without me knowing. So I was just up all night and I couldn't sleep and I had a headache. And he said, hey, what's up? What's wrong? And I said, my head hurts. And he said, how much water have you drank? Like, do you need something to drink? And so as he limped down the hall to get his medicine, he went and got me a glass of water. And so as much as I was there for Brady, Brady was there for me so much more. Because it was so hard for him to be there for me. He could barely walk that night. But he loved me and wanted to serve me still in whatever way he could. So we were each other's rocks. And I think the strength that we both had to serve one another definitely came from the Lord. It did not come from ourselves. We couldn't muster that strength on our own. But God just filled us with his goodness and with his love and with his strength to be there for one another. That's definitely where it came from. And I thank God for that every day.
I think that's an important distinction to make, though, because as someone who's never even began to walk through what you just described, I wrongfully just assumed that since he was the one that was sick, you were the rock and that was it. But it's just incredibly powerful that he was just as much there for you as you were for him. Do you remember the last words that he ever said to you?
Yeah. So at the end of Brady's life, he was not able to speak much. The cancer had spread to his brain at this point, and that's basically what killed him, the pressure from the cancer on the dura of his brain. So his speech was very poor. The last word I remember him saying is Pepsi. Now, Brady had a surge of energy before he died, and he was wanting to eat and drink a lot, which he hadn't done the days before, and he wanted to, get up and walk around, which he couldn't do. But he said Pepsi, and then he shortly after that, went unconscious and then died later. But the last conversation that we had that was really meaningful to me happened a couple weeks prior to his death. It was in the bathroom. And it was very moving because I could tell that Brady was basically saying goodbye. He said, "Mollie, I want to tell you 3 things. Number 1, get a cat after I die." Now I did do that. I did get a kitty. But he just saw me watching a lot of cat videos when I was trying to distract myself. And he's like, "Look, I want you to get a cat." So that's one thing he said. The second thing was that he said, "If you ever meet someone else, I want you to hold on to them and cherish them and never let go." And the third thing was, "Mollie, I want you to be happy. I love you, and you already know everything else." At this point, he was in the process of writing me letters that I could read after he died. And some of them he did finish, but he wasn't able to finish all of them, but he basically said, "Look, you know everything I would tell you, and I want you to be happy, and I love you, and you already know everything else." So I think those things that he said to me, I treasure like gold, and I value those things a lot more than Pepsi, though that is kind of funny. But I don't necessarily think the last words a person says are as important as the things that they've said to you your whole life or their whole life. You know, there's so many things that Brady said to me that are in the center of who he was and what he wanted me to hear. And so I laugh at Pepsi, but I treasure all of the other things he said to me too.
So what were the first few weeks, days, weeks, months? I literally can't even imagine how dark that was for you, and I'm so sorry. But what were those first days, weeks, months like, and how did you pull yourself through that?
Yeah. So Brady died on November 25th, 2019. That was a Monday. The whole month of November, he was a mess, and I don't know how he lived that long. The doctors don't know either. He should have died much earlier, but he just kept on living. So because he died such a slow death, I did not sleep the month of November at all. I did not eat. I did not do anything that you're supposed to do as a caregiver. I broke all the rules because I was just so focused on being there for Brady, which wasn't healthy for me. So then after he died, immediately after he died, I took a shower because I hadn't done that in a long time. And then I slept for like 14 hours straight just because I was so exhausted. Then I slept a lot. And then I was also planning his memorial service because that keeps you busy. And that was helpful, but a lot to do, a big event to plan. It was pre-COVID at the time, and thankfully there were 800 people who came, which was such a blessing. But then after the memorial service, I had gotten some rest, and then I couldn't sleep at all. I was up all night having nightmares if I did fall asleep for 20 minutes about Brady dying again in front of me. And at this point, this was the month of December, my whole family was at work or at school, and I was just sitting at home by myself, which wasn't healthy. And I just found myself being very bitter and angry and not knowing why I had gone through such a terrible thing and why Brady had gone through such a terrible thing. Asking a lot of questions. And I would get together with some friends, but they would try to change the topic if I brought up Brady. So that was really painful. I would try to talk about my feelings and they would say, "Oh, let's talk about something else." So that was really painful and I felt very alone and isolated. And so I had been seeing a therapist throughout all of this, which was helpful. Though I thought it would fix my problems, but it does not do that, but it was still helpful. And after one session in the beginning of January, I just felt this sudden peace from God. And I felt like God was saying, "Mom, you need to go back to school." And I was like, "God, I feel like that's a terrible idea, but okay." And I reluctantly came back to Grove City College in the spring of 2020. And seeing God work in my heart at this place, at this school, and seeing the friendships that followed and the people that God brought into my life here, it's just, it's amazing to see God's faithfulness at work in my life. But it was definitely better, I don't want to say easier, it was definitely better for me to be in a community, even though it's a community that doesn't quite understand this type of grief. But it was definitely better than being at home alone. The month of December was absolutely terrible. If I did sleep, I would just have nightmares, and then just being alone, it was really hard.
So I know you've explained to me that there's a significant difference between moving on and moving forward. Can you explain that difference in how you're moving forward and living in Brady's memory?
Yeah, so I heard this phrase, moving on, at Brady's memorial service a lot. There was a lot of terrible things that people say at funerals and memorial services just because people don't know what to say, but a lot of people said, "Oh, Molly, one day you'll move on." And I was very offended at that language because it felt to me like moving on would mean leaving Brady's life, love, and death behind me, almost like it was baggage that I shouldn't take with me anymore, that I should walk past and leave behind. And I love Brady so much, and he's such a big part of my life. I don't want to leave that behind. I want to carry his memory and his legacy with me wherever I go, wherever the Lord will take me. I want to carry that with me. And so I think that's the difference between moving on and moving forward. Moving on is just leaving things behind. And I think there are some things in life where we should just move on from because things aren't worth taking with us. But I think for a lot of things, it's more important to move forward with the things that we have experienced in life, that we don't need to leave everything behind, that a lot of times these experiences shape us and form us, and we want to carry those things with us. It would be a shame if I left everything that I learned from Brady and from being his wife and his widow, if I just left that behind. It would be a real shame, and I would miss out on a lot of the ways that God would be working in my life today. So I live in light of Brady's memory, and I carry it with me all the time, and I move forward with him, trying to honor him still and cherish him still every day of my life.
So I haven't known you that long, but you've said to me quite a few times, and I'm quoting here, 80-year-old widows are my people. And I just wonder, so on the one hand, you're a 20-year-old on a college campus in the prime of her youth. Then you have this like equally important identity where you are a 19-year-old widow.
I was widowed at 19.
Yeah, and so I just wonder how you're able to gracefully and incredibly courageously not only balance but sort of procure and maintain a state of mutualism between those two identities, because they are very different and it's not something that a lot of 20-year-olds ever deal with.
Yeah, I found that to be apparent when I first came back to school in the spring of 2020. Even just mentioning Brady's death to some of my friends, they would be like, "Oh my gosh, like you're not allowed to talk like that." You know, it was this thing that people aren't used to talking about death and talking about widowhood at our age. It's just not common. But whenever I would talk to my 80-year-old widow friends, they would just laugh with me about their dead husbands, and we would just tell stories together, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, you are my people. You get me. You understand." And even after becoming a widow, I actually joined a Hot Young Widows Club, which is fantastic. Okay, like I love these girls and these men. So we just share stories, like we have membership cards and pins. I have several t-shirts. It's great. And so I think just finding people who you can share all of your dead husbands or dead wife's life with is just so wonderful. And there are people my age that I've found that I can make jokes about Brady's death and they'll laugh with me instead of get scared and run away. The latter happens too. But I think one way that I've learned to live with the balance of it is that I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be genuine. I'm going to be authentic about it. If me talking about my dead husband makes you uncomfortable, well, like I'm not going to change. So it's just something that I've decided not to hide from people, because that's who I am. And the only way that young people are going to get comfortable with grief is by hearing about it, by seeing people live it authentically. If we keep on hiding it and pushing it down, like people are never gonna become comfortable with it. Older people, my 80-year-old widow friends, are comfortable with grief because they've grieved themselves and because they've seen other people grieve. So I think I've just decided that I'm going to grieve the way I grieve. I'm going to talk about Brady the way I want to talk about Brady. And then if people have a problem with that, well, they can ignore me. And then the people who care about me enough or want to know, they'll stick around. And I found that to be true. I feel like there's a lot of people who are willing to learn or curious or just along for the ride with me. But
yeah, even when I was writing this episode, you said to me multiple times, "Nothing's too personal. Just keep asking." And I was like, okay. So going off of the theme of moving forward, would you ever consider dating or getting married again?
This is such a good question. This is a question that a lot of people ask me, actually. It's like one of those things where people will have a meal with me or talk with me, and then at the end they're like, okay, I have a question for you. Would you ever marry again? And so I have several thoughts about this. So one, this is something Brady thought about much before I did. So when Brady was getting sick, when Brady was actively dying, really, he would bring up this concept of marrying again often. He would bring it up all the time. He'd be like, Mollie, I want you to be with someone again. And I'd be like, can we not talk about that right now? You're dying. I would rather talk about something else. And he would just keep on bringing it up. And I was annoyed by it, and I didn't understand, and I didn't think I could ever marry again. I'm like, no, Brady, I'm never doing that again. I'm not doing it. You're the only one for me. That was my response. And after he died, I saw that he started to write a letter, and they titled it Mollie's Future Husband. I literally married the best guy in the world, girls. Like, I'm sorry, like there are no guys like Brady. But anyway, he cared so much about me loving again before I did. And so after he died, I started to get into this different perspective and different mindset. It's hard to imagine your spouse dying until they die, even though you see them becoming sicker and sicker. It's hard to get into that mindset until it actually happens. So after Brady died, I started to really be able to process what it would be like to be with someone else. Not because I was with anyone else, just because I was able to give myself the freedom to think that way. And I think at this point, I'm open to anything, and I wouldn't say that I won't marry again. I don't have like a burning desire to go on a date with someone at this point, you know, but if that's God's plan for me, then I will accept it with open hands. And I think there's part of me that does desire loving someone again, but I think what's beautiful about it is that I don't necessarily want to be loved, but I want to give this gift of love to someone else. I know what it's like. I know what love can do to a person. I know what it did for Brady, and I saw what joy it brought to his life. And I am so willing to give that again, God willing. And I was recently reading the book of Ruth in scripture, and this book is about a widow, several widows, but one widow, Ruth, and she ends up marrying again this guy named Boaz. And as I was reading it, I felt like God was saying, like, Mollie, there's a Boaz for you. I'm like, okay, God, whatever. I'll do whatever, but I'll love whoever. But I think I'd be willing to date and marry again. But I think a good distinction would be that if I were to marry again, that husband would not be my reward for suffering. He would not be my trophy for, grieving Brady well. It would just be another blessing, but not a trophy for grief. And also it wouldn't be an indication or an indicator that my grief for Brady is over. It's like, oh, no, she's happy now. She's got a new guy. It's all good. All her sadness is done. No, I will always be grieving Brady and possibly be loving someone else one day. And I would hold those things in the same hand and walk forward with both of those truths at once.
What is your relationship with Brady's family like now?
I love Brady's family so much. It's such a big family. But his immediate family I'm still close with. Before school started, I actually, got dinner with all of them, and they made me my favorite dish because they're the best. And he has a little sister, Lainey, who is a junior in high school now. It's crazy to me. She was like 10 when we first met. So it's beautiful to see her grow up and to see her deciding what college she wants to go to. And I try to give her some good sisterly advice. But yeah, I'm still super close with them. And it's beautiful, the relationship between Jen and I, Brady's mom. It's a beautiful relationship because it's like we can both remind each other of who Brady was. She can tell me the stories of how he danced in the living room the night of our first kiss. Because I never saw that when he walked into his house and danced across the floor. And I can tell her about, some of the funny memories of Brady making zucchini at our apartment at midnight, like she didn't see those things. So it's like we can remind each other of who Brady was and the silly goose that he was. So it's a beautiful relationship, and I'm so grateful that we're still close.
If Brady were sitting here with us right now, what do you think he'd want us to know?
If he were here, he'd probably be cracking a lot more jokes than me, but he was the funny one. I think what he would want people to know is that hearing his story or hearing my story, I think it's easy to think, oh gosh, Brady lived a hard life, he lived a sad life. Like, what a poor guy. And he hated when people treated him with pity and when people were overly sympathetic to him. That's why when he came to Grove City College, he didn't tell anyone that he had cancer because he didn't want to be treated as the cancer kid. He saw how people treated him differently and he didn't want that. And so I think he would want people to know that his life was not tragic, was not unfortunate. He was able to live a full life, that, he was able to marry me, which was, I think he enjoyed. But I hope so. That would be awkward if he didn't. But that he was able to love fully, but that ultimately he was able to honor God with his life, and that is what we all want, I think, is we want to live a life that honors the Lord. And so living that kind of life, living a life where you're fulfilling your purpose and you're honoring God, that is a fulfilling life. And that's the life he lived, and that's the life he knew he lived. He wasn't sorry for himself, ever. He was like, I am so blessed and so thankful that God is able to use me. And so that's how Brady viewed his life. And that's how I view his life. And I think that's how he would want others to view him too. Not as a tragic story, not as a guy who experienced the worst circumstance, but as a guy who trusted in the Lord all the days of his life and ultimately just honored God with what God gave him.
This is my last question, and I can open it up to you guys if you have any questions for Mollie. But if there's one takeaway message that you want all of us to know, what is it?
That's a biggie. So I wear Brady's cross necklace with me. I wear it on, I guess I should say, every day, as long as I can remember. Sometimes I forget, and then I feel like a bad widow. He forgives me. But anyway, when Brady and I were going through all of his things out loud with one another before he died, we were like, okay, what do you want done with this? What do you want done with that? We came across this necklace, and he told me that he wanted me to wear it so that I could share about him, about his story, and about how he honored the Lord with his life. I'm like, okay, no pressure, I'll wear it. So on the cross necklace, there are these footprints on the front. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Footprints in the Sand poem, but I will summarize it. So basically there's this person walking with the Lord on this beach. And as they're walking, when he looks behind, he can see these two set of footprints, one from him and one from the Lord walking with him. And then at the end of his life, as he looks back, there are times when he sees only one set of footprints, and he says to God, Lord, why did you abandon me? At these times when there's one set of footprints, those were the times when in my life when I needed you the most, when things were the hardest. Why did you leave me in those times? And the Lord responds with, it was then that I carried you. Brady loved this poem and bought this cross necklace in the months after he was diagnosed because he felt that in those times when he was screaming in the hospital or when he was throwing up and he had no more strength to walk up the stairs, that those were times that God was carrying Brady through life. And now for me, I know that I'm being carried by my Lord and Savior, that he is with me, walking with me, and when I can't walk anymore, he carries me. And so I think I would want you guys to know that whenever tragedy strikes, because it will, it might not strike in the way that you lose your husband after being married to him for 4 months. That may not happen to you, and I hope it does not. But hard times in life will come, and know that when they do come, you are not walking alone, and that when you feel like you can't take another step, that the Lord will be there to carry you through.
Mollie, you are amazing, and I always know what to say, and I have no words. Thank you so much for being here. You are a pillar of strength and hope, and yeah, it's just been an honor. Do any of you have any questions for Mollie before we call it? No? Okay. Mollie Landman, thank you so much. You are amazing, and it has just been an honor to get to know you and to interview you. You're awesome. This is just, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, guys, that's all. That's going to be, wow, that's going to be a hard act to follow, but the next guest is really impressive. So thank you for coming. Any announcements? I don't think there's any announcements. No, just thanks for coming. That's all.
Thank you, guys.